Welcome to the third in a series of Fortuna masterclasses. In recent weeks, we've been taking you through essays. We've been talking about letters of recommendation, and those are available on Fortuna's YouTube channel. But this week, we're going to focus on two mission critical parts of the MBA application: your resume, CV for some, and the application forms. Now, you are more than your resume, but you are targeting the world's top business schools, and your resume can be so much more. It certainly will be 60 minutes from now. And if you're thinking that that application form is just your name, your date of birth, an email address, and perhaps a standardized test score, then think again as we look at making great first impressions. These are two very influential pieces in the MBA admissions puzzle. My name is Matt Simmons. I'm one of the co-founders of Fortuna Admissions, and I'll be spending the next hour with two of my wonderful, remarkable Fortuna colleagues from what I always describe as our dream team. I'm joined by Bill Kuza. Bill is one of the Fortuna directors and a former associate dean at Chicago Booth. And Jody Keating. Jody is a resume reviewer still at the Wharton School and a former career coach with the school as well as at McDonough. And between the two of them, they've read a fair number of resumes, but resumes for business school. And that's really going to be a big part of our focus today. This is not applying for a job. This is to secure your place in the MBA classroom. And we've got a lot to get through. We'll be talking about those first impressions that you make and how that really sets the scene for all of the other aspects of the application. We'll then be giving some very concrete examples, as we try to say, show, don't tell. Well, we'll be breaking down and giving some very concrete examples. Bill, I'd love to turn to you first. It's lovely to have you on any of these masterclasses. You bring so much insight. And we're going to talk about the application form. It seems like something a candidate might fill in the night before that they send in their application. Right. Perhaps not the right approach. Tell us more.
Definitely not the right approach, Matt. And thanks very much. Always a pleasure to be here. The application forms seem to be getting more and more complex every single year. More things are asked, more nuance that's necessary to be successful in completing them. So definitely you don't want to be waiting to the last minute to start filling them out. So why is it important? Well, the form does set the tone. It gives the admissions committee an initial sense of who you are and how you approach your communication style and how you approach issues. So it's often the first thing the admissions committee will see or read. It does have a lot of statistical information, but beyond that, there are opportunities to demonstrate your communication ability, your writing style, your attention to detail, and your ability to clearly articulate a particular point. So there are kind of essay-like elements throughout the application form. Also, if there are things that you mess up, if there are typographical errors, if there are inconsistencies, if you have misread a question and answered it in a funny or unusual way, that will be a red flag to the admissions committee. And that will kind of be a red mark on your application file. And finally, when you're going through the application form, realize that this is one of the key elements of the overall application package that you're putting together. It needs to support everything else you're putting together. And it does give you some opportunities to enhance what you're going to talk about in your essays, in your resume, in your letters of recommendation. So it is not something to put off to the last minute, for sure.
Right. On that point, Bill, some that have applied to college, they remember the Common App. They could just leave this information in one and have it be sent to 5, 10, 15 colleges. But schools individualize this, right? That there is a Booth application form, an HBS or an INSEAD application form. They're all distinct.
They are. There are lots of commonalities, obviously. Everybody wants to know your name and address and contact information and where you've worked. But every one of them will have a little idiosyncrasy to it. They might ask about career goals in 150 words, or they might ask about your family background. So there are lots of things that you have to pay attention to, and you can't assume that every single application form is going to be identical. So if you're looking at a number of schools to target, you need to go through each one of those application forms very, very carefully.
Right. setting the tone and giving yourself the time. Some of our colleagues describe the mini essays that you might find in these different application forms. And perhaps that's also one of the reasons you don't want to be caught on the back foot the night before deadlines and they've suddenly asked you 150 words on your post-MBA career goals.
Exactly right. So, I tell clients every time that I begin working with them, as soon as you've identified your target list of schools, sign up for the application, start an application, and read through it. For one thing, it puts you on the school's radar so that you'll then be invited to any webinars, any special events, any information sessions, and they know that you're out there. So that's one of the key elements. But it also gives you time to review that whole application form. And you want to do that really from the get-go, so that as you're thinking about some of those kind of hidden essays, if you will, you know what they are, so that when you're writing your full essays, you can kind of refer back to, oh yes, I also have to write 150 words on why I left my job or what have you. There are also opportunities to identify what I'll call tricky items. Things like Booth, for example, has a question: tell us anything special about your family or your upbringing that you think we might want to know. So, if you have suffered a major illness, or if you're the first in your family to go to university, that might be a place to talk about that. But again, it's not simply checking a box or identifying something from a drop down. You actually have to think clearly about what you're going to do. There are also what we've talked about as hidden essays. So not simply a couple of words, but maybe 150 words, 200 words on things, typically career goals. So tell me why you want to be in private equity, or why do you want to go into tech? And being able to craft that is very important. It must coincide with what you're going to say in your essays, but you have to figure out, how do I say this in 100 or 150 words rather than the 500 I might have for the full essay? So again, they are essays. They need to be well thought of. They need to be reviewed, ideally with a coach or with a friend, someone else who can kind of take a look and say, yeah, this makes sense and I understand it. So.
Right. I'm going to pick up on the word tricky, because some of our viewers, whether you're all following us live, and I hope that you're ready with lots of questions for our two great panelists, but equally, if you're watching this now on YouTube, they might say, interested in family background. Why does the school need to know that? Is it trying to get a context, perhaps someone that's first gen to college, getting an understanding of how you've grown up?
That's exactly right, Matt. It is trying to get a sense of the context of your life. So whether you're first gen to go to university, that is a little different than someone whose entire family has gone not only through university, but through business school over the last umpty years, who has a very good understanding of the process. Also, similarly, if you have, you've been fighting cancer for the last 10 years, that's something that doesn't naturally come necessarily in any other parts of the application, but helps define who you are and the struggles and challenges that you have met and overcome. So this is an opportunity to give the admissions committee a little more context, a little more exposure to who you are and the things that you've dealt with in your life.
Right. Now, your example that you just gave, this is something that, you may not appear on the resume. And that's very important to remember. All of these pieces of the application can serve a different purpose, share different parts of your stories. So we emphasize, don't repeat. What is the underlying principle there?
Well, basically, they already have the resume. Why waste extra space that you have to say the same thing? So you don't want to repeat. That looks lazy. You also have the chance to elaborate a little bit on what's on the resume. Typically, we're going to ask you, and Jody, I'm sure will talk about this, to keep a resume to a single page. That only gives you so much space to talk about what you've really accomplished. So here's an opportunity, in many cases, to elaborate on some of the things you've done, add a little more context, perhaps go into a little deeper into some of the achievements you've had and some of the promotions perhaps that you've had. So again, adding context, giving a little bit more background on some of the outcomes. Again, you get to flesh out a little bit what's on the resume. You do want to be consistent. Obviously, what you're saying here in the application form has to match what's on your resume, but you get the opportunity to add a few things to it. So again, it's an extension of your narrative.
That narrative, we've all watched the trailers for a movie. The sense that some of this might be a teaser for something that you may then go into in more detail in another part of the application.
Yes, that's entirely right. And we typically work with clients to think about the narrative, and I tell clients every year, think of the application as a whole as a story. You are telling a story about you, about where you want to go in your life, in your career, about where you've come from, and importantly, how that MBA program is going to help you achieve those career goals. And all of the elements of the application, whether it's essays, recommendations, resumes, or the application form, have to support that story. And the application form can be, as you say, a little teaser, a little glimpse into what your story is. Where do you want to go? What are the skills you've had? What are the challenges you've met along the way?
Right. Now, of course, we're talking about graduate school, and that implies that you already have a strong academic record behind you. And so, again, in addition to things that you might share on the resume, they're very pointedly asking about that academic record. So we talk about being clear, not cryptic, also ensuring, because they move through applications fairly quickly, that these details are accessible and will stand out to the admissions officer.
Right. So when we talk about clear, not cryptic, so if there are acronyms that are typical in your university or in your degree field, spell them out. The admissions officers know a lot, but they don't know everything. So don't make them guess as to what you mean by a particular phrase or acronym. You do want to include the basics, the GPA and class rank, and explain the scale, particularly if you're an international student that may not be in what we in the US would call a traditional 4.0 scale. So if there's a different scale, help provide some context. So is a 7.5 or an 8 in India a good score or not so good score? So help the admissions committee understand where you stand relative to your peers at your institution. You definitely want to list whatever academic honors you've received, whether that's a graduation honor, cum laude or summa cum laude, something like that, or a scholarship, or a departmental honor, best research paper, best creative writing example, whatever it might be. Provide that. It gives some context about who you are and what you've been able to accomplish. As I mentioned, clarifying unusual grading patterns. And then you have an optional field to explain anything that might have been a problem, let's say. So perhaps you started at university and weren't quite ready for the rigors of a university education, and your first year did not go particularly well. But hopefully you've been able to recover from that and have done well since. Or you suffered some sort of setback over the course of your career and you had a semester where things didn't go well. Again, explain that. It happens. The admissions committees know that. And the challenge there is being able to communicate, how did you recover from that? How have you changed? How have you improved? How have you overcome whatever challenges or issues you might have had?
Right. Bill, how much time we spend talking with inquiries about their stories. Anyone can reach out for a free consultation, and they always overrun. They certainly do in my case, as we get into some very deep discussions. I had a fascinating discussion with somebody this week who, during their studies in the US, had a serious health problem that was dealt with over a 2.5 year period. Now, clearly, that impacted on grades. He was able to show, when he started, before the health issues came up, strong academic record, and equally at the end. This ability for the admissions office to then understand that context. I mean, he went through some extraordinarily challenging times at the Mayo Clinic.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a challenge. And you want to be able to explain that. On the other hand, I also caution clients, you're not making excuses here in that kind of a situation. You're trying to explain what happened. And again, the key is to talk about how have you recovered and how have you overcome.
Right. Now, an M7 school like Booth and the others receive applications from all over the world. So just back to GPA and perhaps different scaling systems. I finally understood after 30 years why Italians have a scale out of 110. I was trying to think, where did they come up with that one? In France, it's out of 20. And they don't hand grades out like confetti. They genuinely believe that 15 out of 20 probably is as good as it gets. So are the schools aware of perhaps different international systems and the severity or the generosity that might lie behind them?
Yeah, the general answer is yes. I will say, though, because most admissions officers in the States have come up through a more traditional 4.0, they immediately kind of internally see a 3.8 and know what that means. As opposed to, all right, I've got a 17 and a half in France. Let me think about what does that mean? So again, providing the context is important. They will understand. They do recognize that different countries have different expectations, and that grade inflation has not hit other places as hard as it has many places in the United States. So they will take that into account.
Yeah, okay. And so your advice would be share before rushing to a GPA equivalent, share the grades, the country and the scoring system that they had.
That's exactly right. So wherever you can provide context that, this is in the top X% of my institution, or something along those lines, do so.
Great. Now, I know that later on with Jodie, we're going to have a blistering session on professional. There are things that she revealed to me about her resume and what admissions officers already know about a big four consultant or an investment banker. Really looking forward to that. But again, on this application form, Bill, they do take the time. They want you to walk them through the past 3, 5, 7 years, different companies, different positions that you've held. Now, you emphasize impact rather than job titles.
That's exactly right. So what is it that you've accomplished? How have you gotten there? How have you moved through the organization or moved up? New things that you've learned. So where you have the opportunity to go beyond, here was my title, here was my organization, here were the dates I was there, take the time to explain, here's what I did, here's what I learned, here's what I hope to get out of this position, and in many cases, here's why I left that position. And here's why you left is never, I didn't like my boss. It's always, I had a new opportunity. I wanted to learn something new. It's always frame things in positives, not in negatives. So you have lots of opportunities for most schools in their forums to really talk about what it is you did and what your progress has been throughout your career. Again, they do have to be aligned with what you have on the resume. That's a big red flag. If you have something in your application form that doesn't match what's on the resume, people start to wonder, either your attention to detail or if you're trying to put one over on them somehow.
Yep. There's an implied chronology, and perhaps there could be a 6-month gap. Be straightforward about it if that is something that you'll address elsewhere in the application. But there were tech layoffs, there've been layoffs among consultants and other fields, and the schools understand that, right?
Yeah, and most schools have a space in their applications to explain any significant gaps in your career history. So that's easily, there are easy places to talk about that. And whether it's got laid off, or I had an illness, or I had this wonderful opportunity to climb Mount Everest, whatever it might be, there are places where you can talk about that. Again, explain why that was important, or what you've learned from that, or how you're going to move into the next chapter of your career from that role.
Sometimes our clients wonder, well, I don't have that blue chip firm on my resume, to share with them. But the idea of emphasizing outcomes and professions, it could be that in that boutique consultancy firm or a very flat, fast-growing startup structure, the opportunities that you've had to have impact were much bigger than in that open office with 150 bankers sitting around you.
Right. I mean, if you're a banker and your primary role is to create spreadsheets, you've got 3 years work of creating spreadsheets. That's different than I'm in a very, very small startup and I have managed 4 people and I have helped launch a new product and I have been responsible for participating in strategy discussions. A whole different set of accomplishments and a whole different set of impacts than you might have in a big firm. So yes, there are lots of ways to explain that. And I know Jodie will go into how do you do that on the resume, which is another place you want to be communicating that very, very well.
Right, the art of the resume. So before we get there, we've looked at academics, we've looked at work, and then this idea that despite the hours at work, there might be other activities, community engagement, and people, yeah, but I work crazy hours. I don't have 20 hours to volunteer, or what are the expectations here?
Well, admissions committees like to see people that do things outside of work. However, they also know that many of the people, most of the people applying to business schools are very busy. They're still early in their careers. They're working very long hours and don't have a lot of time to do other things. However, if there are things that you have done, whether that's volunteer activities, particular hobbies, things you might have done at university, whether that's sports or clubs or leadership positions, this isn't a chance for you to note them down. Again, talking about why they were important to you, what you gained from it, and if there were leadership roles, definitely talk about the leadership role that you might have had. So, and the other thing I often tell clients who come in and say, I don't have a whole lot of extracurriculars. Should I go start something? So, well, the application deadline is in 6 weeks. I don't think the admissions committee is going to recognize your 6 weeks worth of volunteering as something that's really near and dear to your heart. So duration and consistency over time with these activities is important. That demonstrates that you are committed to them, that these are important to you and are important parts of your life, not simply resume enhancers for your application.
Yeah. And randomly volunteering, Habitat for Humanity, Big Brother, Big Sister, UNICEF, there are lots of examples. I'm not sure that there's just one to focus on, but might it make more sense if you'd had a real commitment that you'd made during college to pick up on that in the year, 2 years before business school and sort of extend the arc, reinforcing the commitment that you have to that particular cause?
Yes, indeed. So if you have been involved in something in the past at a fairly significant level, continue that. Again, it shows the admissions committee that you are interested beyond yourself, that you have, it rounds out your profile a bit beyond just what you can talk about from a professional standpoint. And it does give a chance in some cases to demonstrate additional leadership opportunities or impact. So again, if you're leading a club that raised X number of dollars for a charitable organization back when you're in university, or if you're on the board of a volunteer organization in your community, or if you've organized the local sports clubs and manage 50 games a year, all of those things demonstrate leadership, initiative, the kinds of attributes that schools are looking for.
Right, and those different attributes, Bill, Fortuna partners with Poets and Quants for the Centre Court MBA Festival, and we sit down with the admissions directors of all of the top schools. We talk a lot about patterns of behavior, and they've often commented, if whether it's leadership, impact, innovative thinking, thoughtfulness about the well-being and welfare of others. If we're able to see that perhaps in a professional setting, but when you're a student or in that community engagement that you have, it becomes much more powerful to see that in all of these different chapters of your life, this characteristic continues to emerge. Are those patterns what becomes so powerful?
Well, they clearly are powerful. Again, it demonstrates that this is a part of who you are, not simply something you're putting onto your application or in your resume. This is important to you. It has been for a long period of time. I've had one client who's been very involved in volunteering for many, many years. And his ultimate goal is to actually join that organization as a CEO or CFO to help that organization in the future. So that's kind of not only a strong commitment, but a commitment going on into the future as he expands his career. So that demonstrates very, very deep interest in this particular field.
Well, I know Jody will be reinforcing one page on the resume. So just a final point on this slide, you're overstuffing lots of superficial entries, or just the idea, pick 2 or 3. That's the emphasis of quality over quantity, depth rather than shallow.
Absolutely right. And some schools will limit you to typically 3, maybe 4. Other schools will, put as many as you want. But again, be thoughtful about what you're going to put on the form. Are these things that are truly important to you? Have you actually had a significant commitment to them? And are they going to demonstrate certain attributes that the schools are looking for? This consistency, initiative, leadership, et cetera. Not simply, the longer list wins. That's not the case. It's really it's more about what does this say about you and your interest and your commitment and your view of the world outside of your professional life.
Well, with what you've just shared in the last 15 or 20 minutes, I'm glad that we haven't left this to the night before round one deadlines. There could also be in this part of the application form optional sections. You touched on that in the beginning. An optional say, I can go back to something that I've said elsewhere. How do you advise candidates to use this possibility, this opportunity?
Well, in many schools, they will specifically say what they want to see in these optional sections, particularly for an optional essay, for example. Often it is if you've had gaps in your resume, or if you've had a challenging time at university, your grades aren't up to what you might expect. Here's a chance to elaborate on that and explain what might have happened. So definitely want to do that. It is not a chance to kind of tell something that's kind of completely brand new that nobody's ever seen before, unless the question specifically says, is there anything else that helps explain your life or who you are or what you've accomplished? And then you have the opportunity to add some things that maybe aren't well covered elsewhere. But again, we're not talking about excuses for bad performance. We're not talking about excuses for having lost a job, but rather here's what happened. Here's how I reacted to it. Here's how I have overcome that challenge, and here's where I'm going now. And here's what I've learned from that experience. So you're trying to make sure that everything that has happened in your life is clear to the admissions committee, that you're not going to get caught out somewhere along the line. Somebody said, wait a minute, I'm looking at the resume and there's the dates here suggest that there was 8 months where you weren't doing anything. Get out in front of that, explain why that might be and what you got out of that experience. So being proactive, not reactive, is the way you want to be in all of this. So you don't want to leave the admissions committee with any critical questions about what you've done, who you are, and why things happen the way they did in your life.
Right. With our other Fortuna colleagues, you're this remarkable sounding board, very insightful discussions that you have with candidates. And I'm going to use one of our viewers' questions to illustrate this. They've asked, in terms of extracurricular, does it matter if it has only been in a church? Now, only been. That's something that you'd want to discuss through with them, because perhaps what they see is just a minor community engagement. You'll see other things.
Right. And I, not sure what they mean by only in a church. I mean, there are some marvelous things that happen through churches. And again, what was the level of commitment? What were you trying to accomplish? What was your role? Where it happens perhaps is a little less important. I know there may be concerns about the nature of organizations you've been involved in. And that could be something to talk through with a coach or colleague. But in general, in general, there are no bad activities if they are important to you.
Well, we said the application form gave great first impressions. Thank you, Bill, for getting us started with those forms and the impression that that has left. We're going to shift now to the resume, a key document. It's 1 page, right, Jody? But also just this theory. This is for applying to business school and not applying for jobs. So talk us through the big picture that candidates should be really mindful of.
Yeah, I think and this can actually be one of the more frustrating parts of this process, especially if you have a very technical background, is to shift your thought from, I don't need to convey every computer programming language that I know and every software application that I've mastered, even though that's a really significant thing. You're not going to be doing that in business school. If you're going to have to put that aside now, keep it and put it back in later. But I think you really need to focus on leadership and financial impact of what you do, the business application. So you do a lot of software, but what product are you supporting? How is this making money for your company, basically? Even if it's not the main thing, it's part of something bigger. And that's really the main shift, is to get away from some of the more technical things and especially the people leadership, the team leadership. You want to come across as someone that someone's going to want on their learning team at Wharton. Like they want to work with you, that you're someone they can work with, and that you understand business applications of what you do. And that's a really different take on probably a resume that you have already written. And then a lot of the stuff you talked about, the emphasis on community involvement, volunteering, probably if I were consulting you as a professional, I'd say don't even put any of that on there at all. But here it becomes much more significant, and it may seem counterintuitive to if you've just been looking for it from a professional. The other thing
Right.
I think a resume is often used for, I'm pretty sure in a lot of schools, when you go to interview, sometimes the interviewer just has your resume and doesn't have the rest, or is the first thing on the top of the pile that someone's going to look at when they talk to you. So you need to make sure that the key things are on there concisely. Even if you have them elsewhere in your application, you need to have them on your resume too, but concise. Whereas some of the places that Bill was talking about, you can write paragraphs. Here you need to be able to condense to very, very short, because the one page thing really is there's no compromise there. And that's a frustrating part too. You gotta cram it in there. So that can be frustrating for folks, but there's no room to move on that one.
Well, I know as our in-house resume expert, and you've probably even seen, I can remember a resume that was 4 pages long, let
Oh
alone one
yeah.
page.
Yep, all the
But
time.
but you have won us a little bit of space, no photo, but not that statement, a hardworking,
Right.
analytically minded. We don't need to make that sort of introduction.
Right. And you don't need to write, my leadership skills are really good and my communication skills were developed by doing blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
Just stick to what you did. We know you have the skills. You don't have to spell it out. So sometimes with job applications, it's being read by a machine. So you're trying to put all the stuff that's in your job description on there to make sure the machine picks you up so that a person will look at it. In
Mm.
this instance, you're pretty much going to be looked at by a real person from the start. And that's a huge difference too. So you don't need to hammer home the terms. I know when I applied for a job once, I just kept putting that, like in every bullet was almost the same because I wanted all those keywords to show up when they scanned it. But here it's a person. So you really gotta get beyond that and make and write well and write and proofread more.
Now, as I mentioned to our viewers, we're going to break down each of the sections and bringing your insight and advice to all of them. One of my favorites, I know we'll come back to it, but that section at the end on interests and activities, I must admit, I always look at that fun stuff first. And
Me
again,
too.
there's perhaps even just visually on a page, the balance is there sort of, well, it's going to be half to 2/3 professional, a third academic, and then this must be on the bottom, but it shouldn't be more than half of your resume.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, as important as it is, you want to make sure you don't look like you didn't do any work and all you did was volunteer, right? So, I mean, an MBA is a professional degree. So you definitely want to make sure experience is at least half, if not more.
Right.
And then education, and then 25% at the end for the extra things, which is a lot of space,
Okay.
but you
Now we talked about
definitely
the
don't want to look like you never went to work.
yeah, yeah. We talked about the 4 page resume as a no-no, and we might assume no typos, or as Bill was describing, also poor layout. The poor layout thing, I do see resumes that have like blue shading up here, and then they've got 5 stars for their language skills and other things. But again, for business school, we're not being creatively playful.
Right. You don't want to stand out in your format. You're going to be, like I said, these are being read by real people, which is super, but it means that one person is looking at hundreds of resumes in the course of a cycle. So maybe even more than that. And so they need to be able to take a look and find the information as quickly as possible.
Mm.
And if you move things around and have colors and columns, it just makes it, oh, forget it. I'm not even going to read this because it's too hard. I can't
Mm.
figure out what I want to know. And they'll just
Yeah.
move on. So you need to make it very, very simple and not creative in terms of format. And that's a tough one. That's a tough one for some folks. But unlike if you were applying to art school, it would be very different. But this is, cut to the chase, make my time, if I'm your reader, make my time valuable by make sure I see what's important as quickly as possible.
Right. And we talk about context because, while S&P 500 companies might be familiar to the admissions office, the idea of a company size, its focus, or the team that you're then working with. So a lot of judgment calls about what's going to be helpful to understand, roles and responsibilities that I have within that wider context.
Right. Yeah. And then you need to look at, where are you applying? If you're based in the US, but you're applying overseas, or you're based overseas and you're applying in the US, readers might not be familiar with. I had a resume I just looked at from someone who worked for a very significant government official in another country and kept dropping names all over the place. And I said, I'm sure these are very significant things, but if you apply over here in the US, a lot of people aren't familiar with the governments of other countries to the degree that we should be. So explain their title, explain this was the, leading diplomat for this purpose. Give it some context in very plain language so that even someone who may not be familiar with the details is still going to appreciate why it matters and why this is a big deal.
Right. Okay.
Don't just assume people know.
Now we're getting a wonderful flurry of questions that are coming in that I know are going to match up with some of the other areas of discussion. So I will bring them in as we go. Because this first idea of losing the job description, I apologize, it's my typo. And you've spoken to me about just how much an admissions officer might already know about what a consultant does or a banker does. So talk us through this one.
Yeah, I think if you come from a more traditional background, if you're with a big consulting firm or an iBank or even a marketing executive at a brand, you don't have to spell out the day to day. And again, this can be frustrating because that's a lot of your time. I mean, you're doing this is a big part of your job, and I'm telling you not to even put it on your resume. But that's in this case, you can generally assume that a reader's going to know what you do. If you're in this role, for example, is on this slide, and you're doing a lot of due diligence and you're doing a lot of, Excel models to evaluate potential acquisitions. If that's just the basic statement, that doesn't provide any insight, because think about the person next to you. Are they also doing that? Then you don't need to put it on here. If it's the same thing as the person next to you is doing, then you don't have to include it at all. You can skip, which again is tough because sometimes that's a big part of your job. So like this whole middle bullet, you can just take out. Yeah.
It can all go. You wouldn't even mention the due diligence?
Well, you got to give it some context. Pick a project, pick an acquisition, pick a deal, and say, I did due diligence for this with this value, which I think is one of our future slides. So they don't want to know you don't know due diligence. We want to know, are you any good at it? So show an example of the scope of work that you were doing, and that makes it totally different.
Got it. Okay. Now you talk about bringing value. Right.
So here's a before and after.
Before coming to Fortuna, they described performing cost analysis for companies in the IT industry, which is no doubt true. You read that and you just want to know more, presumably, right?
Yeah. Best case, I just skip over it as a reader. Worst case, I think, well, maybe you were terrible at this. Maybe you did it really badly, or maybe I don't know.
That's right. So when there's just the idea that maybe you didn't do a good job doing it. When we compare to this one, so it's 5 Fortune 500 companies, does that already again provide a level of prestige and context that it's such major organizations?
Yes, it means your company values your work, so they're going to assign you to a job for a big client, and that means a lot. That means you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
And then of course here's where you quantify your impact of your analysis. Now, you may not be the only reason they saved this money, but because of your analysis, someone made a decision and it had a financial impact and they renewed their contract. So, you were part of something very significant. Had you done a bad job, none of this would have come out and you wouldn't have been assigned these important projects anymore. So now you're thinking, okay, this person's better than the person next to them at this because look at these outcomes. Right. That's a whole different thing.
Now, Bill, just to bring you in on this one. So, Jodi's taken us from the before to the after. We've got this added depth. We've got the follow-on, the repeat business for the firm. If you imagined yourself 2-3 months later interviewing the candidate that had simply shared that they did cost analysis for company, would you have asked them a question about it and said, well, tell me more, versus the added information and giving you as the interviewer perhaps more of an icebreaker and a place to start?
The before is clearly pretty basic. It's going to, well, tell me more. The second is going to, oh, this looks really interesting. I'm really intrigued with what you have done. Let me ask a little bit, how did you do that? Tell me, again, tell me more, but it's tell me more with a little bit more excitement and interest than just simply, oh, I didn't get enough information. It's now, I really want to know more about who you are and how you do these things. So it just leads to a very different kind of conversation and expectation on the part of the interviewer.
Right. So we're constantly trying to attract their interest levels. Jody, you'd said, quantify, which clearly they've done in the second version of the bullet point. Would you like to repeat the importance of quantifying?
Well, it's a big deal, to be blunt. Again, it just gives more interest, and it also visually, for an MBA application, you should have dollar signs, you should have numbers in your data. It shows that you have quant abilities, which is really important, that you understand finance, even if it isn't the core part of your job, that you see that there is financial implications of things that you do at work. There should be, or there probably are, in some way. Now, this can get hard if you're from a non-traditional background, or if you're from a more creative advertising, world or something like that. But that's what we can help you with, is thinking a little creatively about quantifying. But usually it's pretty easy. How many people did you manage on your project team? Stick a number in there. What was the budget of your project? Or there's a lot of ways to do it, although I do want to caution, while we're on this topic, about confidentiality, which is that you don't want to use private numbers. Treat it like a public document. If it's something you would put on the internet, you can put it here. And also don't make things up. You can say estimated, you can say approximately, you can say over $10 million if you can't give the actual number or you don't know it. You can find ways around those issues, but it's really important to stick to things that are not secret and that are accurate. But it can make a big difference.
Let's see where you've taken these, again, fairly flat bullet points.
Right.
And now we're moving to the interviewing of senior and mid-management executives, the outcomes with a white paper, project values, the impact that had, and the CRM software, 250 new hires. So these, I know we've emphasized with bold, but these are gonna, they sort of jump off the page in a completely different way, right?
Yeah, and if you're talking to someone who's very busy and reading a lot of resumes, they're going to stop and go, whoa, let me check out some of these numbers. They're not going to skip over this, and they're going to want to know more. And you can, you don't have to have humongous numbers in every single bullet. That's not always logistically possible. But your first couple, for sure, and make someone stop and really take a closer look, is really your goal here. And to show that you were entrusted with work that mattered. You really had an impact. You weren't just clocking out at the end of the day. It can make a huge difference.
Yeah. Right. Quite rightly, one of our viewers has said, okay, so 2 examples that mention Fortune 500 companies. What if I don't belong to a Fortune 500 company, or they're not my clients?
Yes.
Again, what we're steering towards is impact, right?
Yes. One easy way to, well, not easy. One way to get around it is to use percentages. If your company's only making $100,000 a year because you're a really tiny startup, but you generated another 20,000, it's 20% or 25%. If the actual numbers aren't big, that's a nice way to show impact on a smaller scale. Improvement over time, improvement year over year shows impact in a way that the absolute numbers may not be as impressive.
Yeah, yeah. One of our viewers asks roles that are more qualitative, and therefore it's difficult to assign metrics. What are your thoughts on that?
It is. That is a toughie. And we can work with you on an individual basis. It's hard without an example in front, but I think audience size, if you're publishing a newsletter for your company, how many people are reading that newsletter? If you have teams that you work on, anytime you're working even cross-functionally on a team, that's a great thing to always include. And that's qualitative work too. Sometimes you're managing research staff, or you're collaborating with a team of 6 to put out the newsletter, whatever. That's a nice way always a great thing to include, is your teamwork and collaboration, for sure.
Great. Okay. Well, one of our viewers works in audit, has a lot of confidentiality agreements that are signed. So how do they approach?
Yeah.
Talk to us. Reach out to Fortuna. As you can see,
Yeah.
the colleagues that I work with, they're real experts, and we will take all of those questions very seriously and provide you with informed and insightful answers. So to all of you, I encourage you to reach out. Where are we going to take us next? Right. Again, project examples for contribution. Now, how's the candidate approach this one? We've got more of those cybersecurity projects. What have we looked to achieve here? Oh, this was the senior managers.
Yeah.
So show, don't tell. You'd mentioned earlier that we don't need this long list of
Right.
coding languages that you're familiar with, or the idea of I've got great communication skills. Where have you want to take us on that one? What's the value add of the second version here?
Right. And by the way, put those programming skills in a bucket and get it back out again later. It's just for the purposes of the application. So it's not that we're saying these things aren't important, and they're not. I know they're not easy. So I don't want to act like we're saying, oh, this stuff doesn't matter. It does. But for this purpose, we just set it aside. And again, try to take a step back. Why were you using Python? What were you building, and why was that important? Even if it took a lot of hours of programming to get it done, try to take a step back to your boss's shoes and their boss's shoes and say, did this matter? Why did you do it? And think about it. In any kind of presentation of your work, anytime you delivered results or presented or even wrote a presentation that an executive presented, that really adds on, especially if you're an engineer or you have a really technical background. Any kind of presentation skills or written skills to balance that out would be something to include. But you need an example. Just to say you have excellent communication skills, everyone's going to say that. So I presented to my C-suite every week, or I wrote the presentation that our CFO delivered to the analysts, or whatever. That balance, if you are technically minded, is really strong. If you can pull that out, that makes a big difference.
Bill, we work with a lot of bankers, a lot of consultants, a lot of software engineers. In this second bullet point, the sole consultant invited to attend internal strategy development meetings. We talk a lot about how you might stand out in your peer group. And this is part of it, right? It's early stage of our career, but you've been identified for something or handpicked for something, and that has value.
Yes, indeed. Again, most of the admissions committees have some general sense of what many of these roles entail, and being the person who is selected to participate in some of these meetings says a lot about how the company views you, and that's important. Hopefully that will also be borne out by your letters of recommendation, but here's a great way to get that idea to the admissions committee right up front off of your resume.
Yeah, got it. In terms of academics, we touched upon this for the application form. Often we'll see the initial resume that just says, where you went to school. Maybe it's got your major, doesn't even have a GPA, and possibly the dates. What are we missing? There's so many other opportunities that you can bring to the admissions reader's attention, right, Jody?
Yes, and this is, again, another way this is going to be different than if you're applying for a job. Professional resumes are probably just going to have your degree in year and you're done. Here, you're applying to another school. So they want to say, when you get to this campus, are you going to be involved? Are you going to be fun? Are you going to participate in the culture of the school, especially if you're going, if you're living full time, if this is a full-time program. So they want to admit people that are going to be involved and that are going to make an impact on campus. So one way to show that is how you impacted your campus the first time around. So you can include things like GPA and GMAT here. You don't have to. It's generally, if you did really, really well, maybe throw it on here just so an interviewer is reminded that, okay, this is a serious candidate. But that's a judgment call that you can talk to your advisor about. But what you should definitely include is significant leadership on campus, not every little thing. Study abroad is a big one. You always want to include global exposure anywhere you can, and almost every candidate that I've ever seen has studied abroad. Sports, obviously, music performance, if you were in the plays, if you were a drama, had a side of that going on. Even leadership within a fraternity or sorority. If you were a leader, if you were elected to a position in those places, I would include it. Not just that you were in a fraternity, but if you were the treasurer or the VP of something. And volunteer involvement in college too. So anything, what did you do in college? What was fun? How were you a leader there? Because that's how people might assume you're going to be a leader again the second time around. And we talked a lot about this when Bill was up, about the other activities and the volunteering. You want to be specific. You also, what I've been seeing a lot here I'm a volunteer for some organization and I've never heard of, I don't know it. Maybe it's local. So it doesn't tell me, is this animal rescue? Is this environmental? What kind of volunteering are you doing here? They just say volunteer with, whatever. Spell it out, make more of it, get value out of it. Say what you volunteer. Do you put on events? Do you, I don't know. I don't know. It depends on the person. But spell it out. Don't just assume that we're going to know who the organization is and what you do. You can, even with just a couple more words, can make a big difference there.
Right. Bill, I remember a year into her position, Stanford, I was sharing the stage with Kirsten Moss at the GSB. We're at the NASDAQ Center. And in the first year, she'd promised me she was going to read every essay. I told her she was nuts. Over 8,000 essays talking about what matters most to you and why. But Kirsten's that sort of person, and she did. And she's talking to the audience about Stanford's tagline of change lives, change organizations, change the world. And the banker that's sitting there saying, oh, what am I going to tell the school? What do they want to hear on this one? So they start to talk about, clean drinking water in sub-Saharan Africa. And she says, it can be one life. Now, here we have the example of someone that's been involved with Big Brothers Big Sisters for 4 years, meet weekly with a 10-year-old girl, one life. It strikes me that the word weekly carries particular weight.
Yes, the combination of weekly and 4 years, the combination there is very, very powerful. This is something that this person is obviously very committed to. And hopefully they can elaborate on this a little bit in some of the other essays and talk about why they're involved here and what it's meant to them and how it's helped them grow and perhaps even what influence it's had on their career and what they do in a professional setting. So yes, very important. But again, the combination of the weekly and the 4 years is really, really, really powerful.
Yeah, and that's one thing I meant to say before as well, is to make sure that your resume correlates with the rest of your application. Make sure that your recommenders, the work that you did with them is on the resume. If they're going to talk about a project or an experience at work, make sure that is also on the resume. Otherwise, it doesn't ring true, right? Or if you have a passion for animal rescue and you have no volunteer work on your resume about rescuing animals, but you write about it, it doesn't ring true. So you want to make sure that things correlate between all of the pieces of your application, just to lend some validity to it.
That's right.
Is really
and if
important.
we talk to Stanford about clean drinking water, they're detectives, right? They want to be able to then connect that to something in your background and not this big vision that you have for the future. In terms of the additional information, our colleague Judith, Wharton's former MBA admissions director, she always makes me laugh on this one. So we start with reading, cooking, travel. Jody, I'm going to make this a double-headed question, but this is very personal admissions, right? So why would you go beyond just those 3 simple words to add a little more color and bring the reader into your life?
Right. Sometimes I think I'm like you, I skip to the end when I read these. I usually go to college just because I'm a college sports nut, but I just want to talk to somebody interesting. And what's interesting? And reading I read a lot, but it's very passive. It doesn't contribute. It's my time for me. So I want to see something that is a little more interesting. Maybe you read something really unusual. Maybe you're really into biographies of a certain kind of person. I don't know, something. Think of it as a conversation starter. Would you walk up to someone in a party and say, I like to read? Probably not. You would say, oh, have you read the new book by so-and-so? And so think about how you would take what you do into a conversation. Maybe you cook a certain type of regional cuisine, or maybe you put on a weekly dinner party for your people in your apartment. anything to get a conversation rolling along.
Mm.
Is sort of how you should think of it. And then this is a really good opportunity to bring in travel abroad. If you've only ever worked in one country, it'll add a lot to your profile to show that you've at least been exposed to other cultures, even if you just did it for personal reasons, that you've traveled a lot. That just makes you sort of more interesting. And you can say, oh, I've been to Croatia. How did you like it there? And then you can start talking about that if that's on there. So those are ways to expand. Think of it like a dinner party, and you want to be interesting to the person that you meet. And, reading, to me, I love reading, but it's not that interesting to other people.
Added depth, and as you say, a conversation starter, which
Mhm.
brings me to something I'm very proud of the three of us. We've managed to get, nearly to the end of today's masterclass, and we haven't yet mentioned AI. There will be perhaps many candidates that have turned to different LLM tools to optimize their resume, having all of those search terms. And Jody referenced earlier on the recruiter side, they've then got their AI bots that are looking for those same search terms. We'll let our viewers know, but for the time being, this is a very personal experience, right? Your sense of if you just brought AI into the resume, that you would lose, it would be generic and look like every other consultant or every other profile from that same category?
Yeah, I think AI can be useful, and it certainly can help look for like typos and things like that. But I think a good test would be to, even if you're using some stuff, help developing the content, because realistically you probably are, take your final project and run it by a friend, run it by a family member, run it by a person, and say, do you care about this person? Do you want to know more? Is this interesting? That's a good sort of litmus test to see if you've kept it personal enough. Is it still something that has enough to just, or are you just going to set it aside and say, yeah, I already know all this about you? Does it give someone something interesting to think about when they read about you? That's sort of a test I use. Run it by your parents or somebody just for the first time and get a test of how it reads. This is good advice, I think.
A flood of questions, which I think is a reflection of both of you and how thought-provoking you've been for our audience. Assuming you mentor students of XYZ Institute, but you're not officially appointed by XYZ Institute, can you still include the name of the organization?
I think yes, as long as if someone calls them, are they going to know who you are? Or, just say, don't list a title, just say I mentor someone, I mentor 3 kids weekly or 3 whatevers. Sometimes, especially within your company, sometimes it's informal. Sometimes you're a mentor to first year associates, but it's not a title. You just do it. And lots of people say that too, but just make sure that if someone calls and asks the organization, they're going to say yes, that you're not exaggerating your impact. But you don't have to have an official title. Sometimes you just fall in line with someone and meet with them every week over coffee, and you can include that for sure.
Right. And traveling within your country, meeting new people on treks. I mean, Bill, you were talking earlier about being part of that community, all of your MBA classmates. So, how you're all going to get along. So, you've trekked with people from different parts of the country, very diverse group. What might you want to share from what emerged from that time that you spent together?
Gosh, it things like how you got along as a group. Were there disagreements that you might have had to manage through? Were there key learnings about their backgrounds that were different? Were there challenges that if you're talking about trekking in kind of a physically arduous way, were there challenges you had to all overcome as a group, and how did you do that? So those are some of the things you might bring in as part of that experience. And again, several places in an application where you might talk about that. To give a sense of your ability to work with other people, your learning of people, about people from other backgrounds, and perhaps how you work together to overcome challenges.
Right. So if we go full circle, Bill, you would encourage us to not wait to the last minute for this. And it strikes me with everything that both of you have shared for the application form and then for the resume. We're setting ourselves up. We know that there will be essays further over the summer, ahead of round one, round two deadlines, we know that we'll be sitting down with our recommenders. But what you've taken us through is giving us this wonderful skeletal structure and perhaps lots of places to explore. I'll note this right now on the resume, but I'm going to come back to it because the more I think about it, perhaps, Jody, you must have seen that a lot of how a resume evolves from the first time you try to capture the impact of a particular project, and the more introspection involved, you might go back to refine it.
Yeah, the reality is it takes time. When you want to add data and you want to add numbers, you have to go look them up. It's easy to just write down stuff without any data, but sometimes you have to go back to your old work files. Sometimes you have to talk to your old managers or bosses. It takes a little time to get the details, so you want to allow time for that. It's not an easy thing to come up with, but it's important to do it. But it's
Yep.
not something you usually have on the top of your head if it was a job from a year or a little bit back ago. So it takes time. And I know every time I look at my own resume, I change it, I update it, I make it better every single time.
Bill, one final point on this one about being succinct. The majority of essays for business school will have a 300, 450, some form of word limit. Same thing, we're not being indulgent in any of this. We're being tight and giving them the essence of what the admissions committee needs to know.
That's exactly right. What's the old phrase? I'm sorry I wrote you a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a short one. That's kind of the point here is you want to be able to demonstrate that you can communicate succinctly and get your points across quickly. And yet still tell a compelling, interesting story as you go through it. Not always easy to do. So requires lots of iteration. And again, even on some of those kind of little hidden essays in the application form, it will take several revisions before you get it right.
And of course, our work with clients, we can spend an entire session talking about bullet points, the weighting of this was a more recent position, and therefore how much additional space. This is what we do, and this is the Fortuna Dream Team that all of you have been following in the past hour. That insider industry insight that comes from across all of the top US and international business schools. And it starts with a phone call. When we set up those initial inquiries, we are looking through the resume. If you share it with us and whatever it looks like today, it doesn't have to be that final polished version that you're going to send to Boston, Chicago, or Palo Alto. And really, the call is about you and what you would like to discuss, different aspects of your profile. How might I frame this? There was this gap in my employment. I don't feel that I've volunteered enough. All of this is open for discussion. So I've got one final question from a viewer, and he's framed it 3 times for me to understand, I think, what he's truly trying to get at. Schools, again, faced with all of the LLM and AI tools, certain schools are asking candidates to share how they have used AI. That will be distinct for each school. Very interestingly, the M7 and what is the group called? The 10 school group made some presentations early in the summer. They were asked by people present at those presentations about AI. Could they tell was one obvious question. The schools smiled. One of them spoke up very quickly. They said, well, we don't see many spelling mistakes these days, as well as that little hyphen that ChatGPT loves to use. But way too many of these applications are looking the same. I think that's one of the underlying. So, you can declare the use of AI. I don't know, Bill or Jody, if you have any additional thoughts on where AI could be useful to support or get you started in your thinking, but where it will let you down. Because if the schools all feel, hey, I didn't get to know the candidate, I wanted to meet this person, but this just leaves me feeling flat. Any final thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I would be really careful. I think that you framed it nicely to say it could be a nice starting point for sure. Just to get the data organized, to get some words out there on a page. But I think, again, because this is going to be read by a person, not a machine, usually, that's who has to be looking at it. And that's where Fortuna, these are the people that have done this for a living for years. So they're the people that can tell you, does this really work? where it may look
There's-
fine to you because you're only looking at your own, but
Right.
run it by someone who looks at thousands of these and they'll tell you right away, it needs to be better. So
Yeah,
I think a
perhaps that
mix is
sense of
probably your
volume
best
becomes
bet.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
Bill, a final thought?
No, I just reiterating what Jody just said and what she said earlier. Show the work to someone else, to a person, and will what you've put together, whether using AI or not, be compelling to a person, because a person's going to be reading it ultimately. So, does it bring together who you are, something individual and authentic about you? And that's the danger in AI, is it can't know you as well as you know you. And we work really hard at Fortuna to help draw out all those critical attributes that make you who you are, and can then help you present those in a way that is compelling to an admissions committee.
Now, I will warn viewers that you may get conflicting opinions the more people you show something to. So two people may say opposite things, but that's for you to decide ultimately as the candidate. And the Fortuna people are the people that really know what they're talking about. But again, more people you show it to, it may crowd your thought process, but that's good. That makes you look at it and make your own decisions and stand by it. So the outcome will be better.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was striking on a stage. Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, Booth, Sloan, 10 schools, all of them. We can tell. We can tell, and I think it speaks to your point. When you read so many hundreds and hundreds to the one individual, it might seem to have its flow. But it simply was falling short when it reached the admissions office. Now, I hope that the candidate whose final question was about some of the adventure activities that you've been doing and where they might fit onto your resume, reach out, set up a call, and flag and say, hey, I want to talk to Matt because I want to find out about those adventure activities. They sound really cool. And that's something that you can do if you go onto a website. It's really easy to find the free consultation section. I mentioned that this was the third masterclass in a series, and in previous weeks with others of our colleagues, we've been looking at the essays, we've been looking at letters of recommendation. On Fortuna's YouTube channel and on the Fortuna website, there is a ton of information. Jody was talking about individuals whose professional lives, began working in admissions offices, and they brought all of that insight together. There's an extraordinary wealth of knowledge there. So we hope that you will enjoy all of those resources and enjoy this session together. I certainly did, and that really is thanks to you, Jody, and to you, Bill. It was a great session. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you.